Live. All right. Well, we are live, and I am not Tim, the Bible thumping wingnut. I am not Tim, but we are live on Tim's channel. We have taken over his channel. We are here with Chris Mounty. Myself, I am Andrew Rappaport. We are here discussing something that Chris, you and I were going to discuss last summer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we've been waiting to talk about this because it's interesting from both of our perspectives, right? Atheism, yeah. Atheist Dogma.
And so anyone that wants to, if you're watching in, let's see, I'll put the link in YouTube, so it's there now if you want to join us.
I just put it on my page too.
So Chris, can we tell the backstory?
That might take the rest of the night. So I had you. Okay, the real backstory is I had you on my show years ago, like a couple years ago, and then I moved to Jersey. That's when I lived in Philly. Then I moved to Jersey, and I actually had you come visit, and we did another show while you were here visiting, and I made that night. I decided to make beef stew. And by the way, to make up for all of this, I need to let you know that I should have invited you to have dinner with us tonight because me and my dad had a cook-off, and the meal of the cook-off was pot roast. We each made a pot roast. And you know who won? Everyone. There was 2 delicious pot roasts in the house. So yeah, I made beef stew. We did our hang. I drank a little wine, and then I was like, all right, Andrew, talk to you later, bye-bye. Without, letting him taste the stew. And I think that the pretenses were he was supposed to come over for dinner. And I just was, oblivious to it. I was just like, all right, see ya, Andrew.
What was really bad is okay, so we come in, and you showed me this stew, and you're stirring it, and it smelled so good, and we're just like, the whole time we're doing this hangout, I'm thinking oh man, that stew smelled so good. You and I are just kind of eating some cheese and crackers, and we never actually got to discuss Atheist Dogma.
Mm-hmm.
We never even got there. I think we did 2-hour hangout. Never even got there.
Oh yeah, it was a very organic. We talked about a lot of stuff that I thought was interesting. I think that stuff we talked about was worth talking about, and I'm fine for things to be organic, but, we did have a goal of talking about Atheism Dogma.
Yeah, and we had a goal of eating that pot roast.
Neither of those goals were met.
But you still are in Jersey, and we still have to set up a plan.
There's a way to rectify this. There's definitely a way to rectify this.
So, and as the room is filling up, we're going to start with just Chris and I going a little back and forth for a little bit, and then as folks who are in the room, as you get questions that you want to ask, just jot them in the chat, just so we know you have a question, and then we're going to invite you in from there. So that you can
and hopefully we get a mix of people. Now, obviously, I am a self-labeled atheist, so if you have a question for me about atheism and the topic we're talking about, please feel free to put those into the internal chat. And then, of course, if I do get some of my atheist acquaintances, because I did post the link on my Google Plus page, if they decide to come in, then, if you're watching this right now, please do yourself a favor and ask a question of Andrew in the internal chat. But for the sake of things going smoothly, you're not going to be broadcast until we know that you are a real person asking a real question.
Yeah. So So here I want to ask a question you and I have gone back and forth on, right? On the definition of an atheist, because I think you and I kind of have
we approach it differently.
Well, I think we understand each other, but we're going to have different views. So.
Yeah. So, all right. My bottom line answer for this is it doesn't matter what the label is that's used, so long as I feel like I'm being heard when I say something, and that I engage in empathic listening when you say something. So long as we're talking to each other like people, you could call me whatever. Not well, not whatever, but as long as it's not, as long as it's not
I was
insulting.
gonna have fun with that. So, for those who don't know, Chris and I do get along very well, as I hope you could see. We clearly don't believe in the same things, but we like each other's company, like hanging out. And so, one of the things, though, is historically, right, the definition of an atheist versus agnostic was an atheist was someone who knew God didn't exist versus an agnostic who said, I don't know if God exists. Now, that definition has been changing in recent years, and we've seen now what's being called hard atheism, soft atheism. And hard atheism really being what used to be atheist, and soft atheism being really what's agnostic. So first off, Chris, do you agree with that explanation?
To an extent. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of nuance, right? And one of the reasons why you and I disagree about the definitional terms is because I approach word meaning and language meaning as words don't inherently have meaning. They have usage within context, and from that context in which they are used, that's where meaning is derived. And the context has changed since the origin of the word atheist, and I think that its meaning today is as valid as the meaning was back then when it was used back then. So atheism now, a lot of people would just say without God, right?
Yeah.
Whereas agnostic is not knowing there is a God. Gnosis is built into agnostic, gnosis being knowledge, so not knowing whether there is a God. And then without God is just it can be taken a bunch of different ways. Now, to know that there isn't a God is like strong atheism, and to be against the God concept, and I know that that's offensive to some, and I don't mean it to be, is anti-theism, right? And then you can be militant about any of these positions or moderate on any of these positions. Sometimes I really don't care. Like, I don't care what Andrew is at the end of the day, so long as he and I can have a great conversation. But when we are discussing religion, I care about what he thinks, right? But I want to treat him with respect. So I consider myself a moderate atheist. If you want to call me an agnostic, that's fine. And when we're not talking religion, I'm an apatheist. I don't care. I'm apathetic towards what your beliefs are.
That was the first I heard that one tonight. I was laughing when you said it on the previous hangout. So yeah, hard atheism, soft atheism. I'm a soft atheist. Yeah, and I think that I agree with you to an extent. Words have changed over time. I mean, an example I use when I teach on hermeneutics, that's the art and science of interpretation. Specifically, we focus on how to interpret the Bible. An example I always use is the fact that to show how language changes over time is the word gay. And I always use the example for FDR. There was a reporter that referred to FDR as a very gay man. What was he referring to? Well, everyone knows that the reporter was saying that FDR was happy, not a homosexual. Well, the word gay has changed since FDR's day.
Sure.
And so we do know that words change. Now, I'm kind of curious because we do, in a case where we have words that change and take on new meanings, typically they do that for some reason. There's either people don't like, I mean, keeping in mind that words, there were words like sodomite, which had a harsh tone to it, and so people were giving giving a new terminology to kind of soften some of that. You have it with, the years ago you used to refer to people with more melanin in their skin, you'd use the N-word. Then they became colored folks, and then they became African American, or black, and then African American. And so the name has changed through time to be descriptive, and there's a purpose in that. I mean, right, to get away from the N-word, which had a very negative, harmful connotation, it was being changed.
But I think that there's different reasons for different cultures using words differently, and hence different meaning. Like you can even use so for instance, I think what you're talking about is addressed really well by George Carlin, who I know that as a theist, George Carlin may not be as funny to you as he is to atheists.
I saw some great things. He actually did do some clean stuff once in a while.
Yeah, he was super witty, and one of his rants is about euphemistic talking, soft language, right? So that you don't have you're not shell shocked anymore. You have post-traumatic stress syndrome. Like the more words you string together, the softer it sounds, and the more it hides how harsh something is. You know, that used to be stigmatized. But so that's one thing. Another thing is like the word mad, right? Mad, in a European sense, means insane. Mad, in an American sense, almost always means angry, right? Two completely different, or pissed, if you don't mind me using that word. Pissed is being upset in America. It means being drunk in Europe. So those are two currently existing cultures where the same word usage generates different word meaning.
Yeah. And I mean, all right, just off topic, but George Carlin actually did one of the funniest things I ever saw.
Oh yeah, I'll talk about George Carlin all night.
I remember seeing on, and I'm dating myself because I was like a teenager. It was when HBO had just come out, but he was in a circular auditorium.
Yes, I remember this.
And someone got up, this lady gets up, and she's like in the third row, gets up and walks to the bathroom. And as she's getting up, he's like, "What, I'm not funny enough for you?" I mean, just, and as she leaves, she turns to the guy that's sitting next to her and says, "Is that your wife?" And it was like his fiance. He goes, "Can she take a joke?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "No, seriously. Can she take a joke? Because after I pull this off, if she can't take a joke, there is no wedding." I mean, that's how serious this is going to be. Oh, yeah. He actually had the first, 5 rows get up and do a 180. So when she came back down, her seat wasn't there anymore. And
perfect.
Just ripped, going, and it was all, none of it planned. And that's the thing. Sometimes you get comedians that just could do things completely unscripted and funny. But yeah, he was a very witty guy, and he actually, there was a lot of things he would talk about, like you're mentioning, that were not just for comedic sake, but were actually to get people thinking.
I think that he was an activist in a way.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of that in him, and it came out. But he did make a good point. You string the words together, it softens it. So why do you think, as we talk about atheist dogma, the first question I have for you is, why do you think the change from agnostic to atheist is occurring, that name change?
Well, agnostic occurred later, right? If I remember correctly, is it Aldous Huxley that invented agnostic? And atheism is, and I'll look it up real quick. And atheism is older, right? It's originally Greek. Well, but if you look at the etymology, even if you look at online etymology generators of words, go ahead.
The history of atheist, the word atheist, actually was in Rome to refer to Christians.
Yes.
Because they didn't believe in all of the gods of Rome. They believed in one god, and they were called atheists, meaning that they were against the gods. And so they were atheist originally, if I remember correctly, was a term used for Christians and used to persecute Christians because they were atheists.
So it's all a reference point, right? And that's why Richard Dawkins gets away with saying, and by the way, it was Thomas Huxley that coined the term in 1870, agnostic. That's why Richard Dawkins gets away with saying, hey, everyone's an atheist. I'm just an atheist to one more God than you, right? So like in the examples, thank you, one atheist towards one. Yeah,
he has one less God than Christian.
Yeah, I have one less God. I'm atheist towards one more God.
Yeah, he wouldn't claim to have two.
So like if you don't believe in Zeus, that's a god, you're atheistic to Zeus. If you don't believe in Krishna or Vishnu, then you're atheist towards them. So I mean, that's where he gets away with that reference point version of the use of the word atheism. But I think, to answer your question, I'm not trying to dodge your question, I think that the stigma is starting to go away from atheism a lot more in culture, not necessarily in my family. So here's a quick story. So being an atheist, and being raised Roman Catholic, speaking of George Carlin, my favorite line ever is, I was raised Catholic until I reached the age of reason. We still celebrate the holidays. I think that holidays are fantastic. I celebrate Christmas. I celebrate Easter. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to connect with my family and to have good times, good food, good conversation. So for Christmas, you know, my mom still, I'm a 44-year-old man. She still asks me for a Christmas list. And I'm like, Ma, you focus on your grandchildren, really. She's like, no, I know that you like to read. Are there any books you want? I'm like, okay, so here's a few books that I'm interested in. Of course, they're like, you know, atheist books. Apparently in Barnes & Noble, there is now a section of atheism. And my mom going to buy this book in the atheism section, she had to tell me afterwards. I don't even remember what the book was. Like the Atheist's Handbook or something like that. And I opened it up and I'm like, oh, cool, I wanted this. She's like, I know. And let me tell you, when I went into Barnes & Noble and asked where to find this book, and they pointed me to the atheist section, I could feel the fires of hell licking at my feet. So my point is, for that whole crazy digression, it's still stigmatized. It still has a stigma, but I think that it's softening, and with the softening of the connotation, there is a softening of its definition of how it's being used, or maybe vice versa, or maybe they're reciprocal. The reason why it's getting more accepted is because its use is changing. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah, I do think the use is changing. And that's where, you know, we want to talk about what atheist dogma is. I think that's why I think that atheism is, at least my thinking.
Okay.
I think atheism, that term, carries with it. It sounds more, I want to say, noble. It sounds more. It sounds more intellectual than agnosticism, because I think what happens is people sit there and say, well, I'm agnostic, and the immediate rebuttal is, so you don't know. Mm-hmm. Right? So immediately you're now in a discussion and you're immediately on the defensive because you don't know. And anything that could become anything you argue for, people can get that thrown in their face. So I think that some of that change.
I think that's a personality thing, to be honest, because I don't know, I embrace as a version of intellectual integrity. So if I admit that I don't know something, and then I talk about theories that resonate with me, and then somebody comes back and says, yeah, but you don't know, then I just remind them that I'm not telling you how it is. You know, I'm not here to debate you. I'm here to educate you about how it is that I think about these things, assuming that you're curious about it. But if you want to debate me, then that's not what this is. But that's just me. Because there are some that combine them. So there are some people that are like, well, atheism is without God, but agnostic is not knowing there's a God, so I'm an agnostic atheist. Right? I know that people sometimes do that, and some philosophers are like, you don't really have to do that, and some of them, you know, it resonates with some people and not others.
And that's the thing. So, okay, so I want to open this up to you first to say, okay, when we talk atheist dogma,
yeah.
So for folks that don't know, just not assuming everyone understands, dogma is teaching. So what would be the dogma for atheism?
The dogma, well, see, defining dogma as just teaching kind of takes it a little bit more technical. Like I would say that dogma is an adherence to, like, a dogmatic ideology is kind of what I would use as a definition for dogma. Dogma is adhering to something and being unmovable about it, having unquestioned answers instead of answers that don't, or unquestioned answers instead of unanswered questions. Right? I'd rather have unanswered questions than unquestioned answers. If you have unquestioned answers, then you're approaching whatever the topic is dogmatically. Right? So atheists, all views, in my opinion, have a dogmatic extreme bend, right? You can talk about feminism, you can talk about politics, you know, regardless of what flavor of politics. You can talk about atheism, right? So, like, to me, as a moderate atheist, I would say that militant, anti-theist activists are the most guilty of dogmatic ideology. They not only disagree with it, they want to do away with it, and they want to persuade you that you're wrong if you believe it. I think that's a horror show. And
that's actually one of the reasons why I like talking this with you, because a lot of people don't even recognize that. Or I think if they can recognize it within the atheist circles, they feel like they can't say that because somehow that would be giving in to the enemy. And by the way, we see that on both sides. I mean, I've seen people that profess to be Christian that will say things they know they don't end up believing, but they don't want to give in. So I think that's just, as you mentioned earlier, depending on people's personality. So,
well, I want this to be as flow as possible. So the Meows Cat just asked a question. I'd like to address it because it's on topic. He asks, "Do I think that Christian apologists don't question their own answers? Actually curious." I would expect nothing but genuine questions from you, Meows Cat.
well, I added him in so that he can unmute himself and ask.
Oh, perfect. Do you want to add anything to that question before I go at it?
No, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The reason why I ask is I have run into some people who claim to be atheist or atheistic who think in the negative in that perspective, that they don't actually question themselves or their own beliefs or their own answers they present to the unbeliever. So, yeah.
I gotcha. I happen to have interacted, and for those that may not know, I'm not doing this to brag, please don't view it this way. I used to have an interview show where I used to talk to people that I disagreed with, that were both atheists or theists, and I've talked to more than a handful of Christian apologists. And if I were to believe, before I did that show, that Christian apologists don't question their own answers, having done the show, I would have been disabused of that. I mean, we're talking. I talked to Dustin Seegers and Paul Taylor and Andrew Rappaport and Tim and Len and Colin and just Jonathan Bradford. I mean, so many people that are apologists, and they will happily explain to you why they think what they think. But they're also they're not all outputs. They do have inputs. Right? So I genuinely do think that there are Christian apologists that do question the things that they're saying, and because I study psychology, part of me kind of thinks that the reason why they engage in apologetics is to sharpen their swords, to get better at the defenses of their faith, and also to suss out what are the weakest parts of their argument, and when a weak part is exposed, I genuinely believe that they think about it, they question it. So when I say, and I think you're referring to the comment that I made about unquestioned answers instead of unanswered questions. I think that there are some apologists, obviously, that they are not interested in understanding, they're not interested in listening, they are interested in output only. I need to persuade you, I need to convince you, and there's nothing you can say that will change my mind about anything that I'm talking about. I think that they exist, but I don't think that it's fair to paint all apologists with that broad stroke. Does that answer your question?
Good. Yeah, definitely. And I will say that I appreciate that perspective, and I would agree that there are some people out there who I would say misuse apologetics, or they just pick it up and swing it around without actually examining it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can definitely agree with that.
Did you had some comments earlier as well about when we were talking about the word atheist and the meaning of the words? Did you want to add anything more to that?
I guess a little bit, because I wanted to mention that though I will agree that the term atheist has changed over the years, I would say that in reference to your example, Andrew, that gay has changed over the years as well. The meaning of the word gay, I'd say that the term has changed more with the term gay than it has with atheist. I'd think. I mean, if you guys want to weigh in on that, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I think for different reasons, gay has changed, right? Gay as a social movement, social equality movement, is certainly light years beyond, or social justice, whatever you want to call it, atheism. I think that atheism has more stigma than gay, right? Weren't there studies done about who would people be more likely to vote for, and an atheist president would be is always at the bottom of the list and has been for the past, since the poll has been going on.
Well, we have one now, though. I mean, though during the election,
Self-avowed.
Yeah, I mean, in his book, and most people probably never read his book. I actually did read his book, but both of them. But you know, he admits he's a professing atheist. He admits to going to church because he wanted to get basically that's what he needed to do to be a community organizer. But yeah, I mean, he you know, I think he's changed a lot of that because he came in having to, like you're saying, say he was a Christian, but then drop that pretense, I think. Now, Vincent had a question as well, and then what I want to do is I'm going to let him ask his question, and I want to get to something you and I were going to talk about in your hangout, which was, I remember you and I had talked about on a hangout about atheism as a political movement, what the views are there. So,
Okay.
Vincent, we'll go with your question.
Hey, my question is, do you interact with other religions the same
Hey,
way?
you don't have to cry when you ask a question, Vincent.
I'm not that scary, Vincent.
I got too many kids in here. I'm sorry.
I couldn't resist.
Do you interact with other religions the same way you do as Christianity? And if so, how? If not, I mean, if so, how are they different than the way Christians interact with you?
I will happily admit that Christianity is the religion of choice for me to question because that's how I was raised, and I very much see this as self-exploration as much as anything else. I have talked to people that consider themselves Scientologists. I have talked to people that are Muslim. I have talked to people that are Jehovah's Witnesses, which is a form of Christianity, and Mormons, which is they consider themselves a form of Christianity. But because I was raised Roman Catholic, I am much more curious about Christianity. So my interactions are usually the same. I don't really find... maybe it's because I study psychology, but I have you can call it a presupposition, if you will. I have a presupposition that individual differences exist in any worldview. And I see that. I definitely see more militant and more moderate versions of pretty much every flavor of worldview that I've interacted with. And I think that I get more flack from the atheists or the anti-theists because I think I go at them a little bit harder than I do anyone else because they're self-labeling as me, right? They are atheists, but they're acting like anti-theists. And that makes me look bad. So my ego gets chapped a little bit. And so because, you know, just like anybody else, when your ego gets hurt a little bit, you kind of go a little harder. My ego doesn't get hurt when people say that they're Muslim or Christian or Scientologists or whatever. It doesn't hurt my ego. But when somebody self-labels as me and they do a crappy job at justifying why they do what they do, it gets my, is it heckles? Or hackles?
Yeah.
Hackles up. Gets my hackles up.
So okay, now I'm curious. A couple things, and Vincent, if you still have questions, you can interact. I'm just kind of want to zoom in on this a little bit. So you ended up saying with Scientology that they claim to be Scientologists. I didn't know why you labeled that one different. Was there any reason?
Oh, just no. I think that it was just a rhetorical flair because you know very few people will self-admit to being Scientologists just because of the most recent negative publicity they've been getting. So I think that was just in the back of my mind.
I mean, at some point they've gotten good publicity? Oh, sorry.
I mean, in L.A.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and obviously, just from your reaction, you've probably... I'm teaching a class on world religions right now based off my book at the Striving Fraternity Academy on Mormonism right now. So your reaction on Mormonism was clearly you've done some study on it. I've often said it's science fiction.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I mean, Scientology, Mormonism, they're some of the most recent American religions.
Scientology was
created science fiction.
Scientology was the invention of, from a science fiction writer over a poker bet. So, yeah, you're no offense, you're old enough to probably remember the Dianetics commercials.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
The bet is that L. Ron Hubbard bet someone at a poker game that he could to get 1 million people to buy a book to believe into a religion, and he put all of his money behind it.
And other people's money. You raise money.
Yeah, yeah, that too. But yeah, that's science fiction. Mormonism. Most people don't know that its founder, Joseph Smith, was arrested as a known con artist multiple times. Yeah, I'm not gonna be putting much faith in a religion that's based on a con artist that supposedly saw some, golden tablets that no one else gets to see.
Oh, and he interpreted them twice, and the interpretations were different both times.
Actually, the most entertaining story that I find on Mormonism is, someone named Sandra Tanner talks about it, and I forget how she calls it, the black hole of text or something, the black hole text, I think is what she calls it, I forget, but basically what it was one of the followers of Joseph Smith was like saying, please give me a portion, my wife wants a portion of the text so I could show her and prove to her that you're from God and you're and so he wanted a copy and he just kept hounding him. Eventually Joseph Smith gave in and gave him a portion of this manuscript from the Book of Mormon, and it disappeared. And all of a sudden, in the official document, it no longer says what the text originally said, but it was supposedly that Joseph Smith got an interpretation from God that we're going to summarize what that text says because of this wicked woman who did this. And Sandra Tanner made the argument of maybe what Joseph Smith was thinking, oh, I can't really take this and translate this again, because if she's got the original, someone might just, if I translate it, all of a sudden pull it back in, and guess what? She can now compare what was supposedly from God with the original, since she had the original. And so no one actually knew where that original was anymore. It kind of disappeared, but it's one of the funny things of Mormonism. But yeah, I wouldn't put much trust in a religion that tries to teach everything that Satan taught. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. Satan said to Eve, "You will be like God. You'll come to do good and evil and become like God," and that's exactly what Mormonism teaches. But so Vincent, did you have more that you wanted to say with that?
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. If there's any others that have some questions, just shoot them in the chat. If you're watching on Mixlr or on YouTube and want to join, there is some room still that you can join in. So feel free. So Chris, you and I were on a hangout, which, by the way, for anyone watching to know, you and I did this hangout. We did an after hangout where the after hangout was completely full of professing atheists other than me. And if I remember correctly, you gave each of them like 3 minutes, and then you gave me a minute to respond. And someone started really criticizing me for not giving good enough answers because I was trying to stay within the 1 minute, and you ended up, piping up and saying, "Look, to be fair, there are like 10 of us in this room,
Yeah.
and everyone's ripping into Andrew, and he's only got 1 minute to respond. So don't rip into him unless you're going to sit there and allow him to talk longer." And then you gave me a 5-minute time to speak, so I appreciate that.
Without a doubt, man. That kills me. Like, I'm like being raised Italian American. I have an appreciation and threshold for overlapping conversation. That's what I call it, because that's the most diplomatic way I can think of phrasing it. But come on, if you're just going to interrupt and not let somebody answer a question that you spent 3 minutes.
So I have a
crafting.
question for you.
Ha ha. But in that hangout, we the whole atheism and politics topic was brought up, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was it then?
You had brought it up then. Then you and I had talked about it when it's just over a phone, I believe.
Yeah.
And you had some very interesting views that I don't typically hear professing atheists say. And so, that was really what I was hoping you and I would get into a back and forth on your hangout. And so when I got the opportunity to do this with Tim, I said, yeah, I would like to have Chris on and talk about Atheist Dogma. And and also, if you could see in the chat, Cat's Meow also has another thing that he wanted to bring up with Atheist Dogma. He said, I'd love to have Christopher to go into the fundamentals of atheism some more, of just the basic tenets. So if you could tackle
Sure.
that.
All right. So atheism is not a unified worldview, right? From my perspective. It's not a unified worldview where we all think the same thing. Remember earlier I was talking about individual differences within a worldview. I think that that also exists in atheism. And for myself, the unifying worldview would be secular humanism. So secular humanism, secular, it not having to do with religion, right? And humanism, which is more of a philosophy that approaches a unified, goal-oriented, value-oriented set of beliefs that you could commit to. That is, I think that that answers the question a little bit better. Atheism, for me at least, and I think that you'll hear this from other atheists, just happens to be without God. Going beyond that, atheism in and of itself doesn't have goals and values that somebody should commit to. This is, and once again, this is Chris Maudy's version of atheism. So, secular humanism, being that it's
Just admit that Chris Maudy is not the answer-all, the be-all of everything?
I am not saying that, because I am. I am exactly that, Andrew. You and me both. We have it figured out. No one else does. So humanism is much more of a philosophy that has to do with, making the world a better place for future generations, having respect for each other, having compassion and empathy, and or not that we don't have it, but maximizing the amount of compassion and empathy that we have towards others, in the hopes that we can lift all of the citizenry up. And a part of that does have to do with having scientific literacy, having a scientifically literate public in such a technologically advanced age. Certainly facilitates very interesting policy decisions that are being made, because a lot more policy decisions are being based on science, and having a scientifically literate populace is very good for that, an informed consumer base, even if what you're consuming is the information that politicians are giving you, or your right to vote on policy. So that's the best way that I can answer it. If you want my personal opinion, if you want me to go deeper into the specifics about my personal opinion, I have values and goals of having the highest quality, maximal quality of life for myself, and for me, that means having the lowest amount of suffering for the people that I love, and the people that I love extends not only to my nuclear family. I am not married, I do not have children, but I am the youngest of 3 children, and I have nephews and nieces, and my mother is one of 9 kids, Roman Catholic, hello. And, I have aunts and uncles and, people that I love, and so there are rings, concentric rings around me of people that I very much care about, and it extends to the human race. I don't want to see anyone suffer unnecessarily. And I think that having compassion and empathy and a moral compass that allows good policy to be made for the best of the majority of people is one of the goals and values that I commit to. Another one that's even more specific is having really good conversation. And I think that one of the reasons why I accepted Andrew's invitation here is because he allows us to have this kind of, he's letting me talk. I've talked for like a full minute already, and he's letting me. That's important,
So anyway.
Exactly. I feel heard when I get to get my point out. And I think that it's important to, yeah, Andrew may have fallen asleep. I think that it's important to engage in empathic listening when other people talk. So I'll try not to interrupt when other people talk, because I think that these discussions, building bridges between worldviews, is what's going to best facilitate making the best decisions that'll bring the whole population up to the highest standard, so that everyone can have maximal quality of life. That's
okay,
the best way I can put it.
Let me ask a question. When we talk about the use of science in influencing political decisions.
Okay.
Real interesting, because this was one of the things that ended up happening, and I don't know how much you followed the break-in over in the UK, where they basically hacked into the email system of the folks that were doing all the research for global warming. Mm-hmm. Basically, what they had found was that some data they were hiding that didn't support their conclusions. Some data they were
No, no, it wasn't. It wasn't hiding. You're using they didn't use that term.
No, no. But there was data they didn't use.
Yes, which happens in all research.
Yeah, but there was data that didn't prove it wasn't giving the conclusions that they wanted. And one of the things that I always remember from that was a quote from in one of the emails from the director, who argued, because there was an email exchange on why some of the people under him were challenging the fact that the data that was being used and certain data that wasn't being used was not being honest and fair for the public because of the fact that it only had one point of view. And it was very interesting because one of the lines that the director had said was that we must do this to force the politicians to change the policy. Now, I kind of latched onto that only because when this whole thing kind of blew up, his argument was, I'm not a politician, I'm a scientist, like therefore I should be out of this. And I kind of felt, no, you left the science when you tried to do things to affect policy.
I agree. I think that when it comes to scientists doing research that affects policy, the most important role they can play is, and the term used is as an honest broker. Here is what the results show. Right? Now, in showing that these are what the results show, you can collect this much data and report this much and have perfectly valid reasons for leaving out the data that you collected that you don't include, right? Valid reasons, not invalid reasons like, it doesn't fit my thoughts, right? That's not a valid reason. Or that is an invalid reason. A valid reason would be like, okay, well, this is less reliable than this, and the majority of the, data that was collected uses this methodology, and this protocol wasn't followed for this, whatever, So being an honest broker is the most important thing that can happen. Now, also, the data that was collected that the emails that were hacked were pursuing has been looked at again, and nothing has been found to be egregiously illegal, underhanded, hiding, deceptive, or anything like that. So.
Yeah, well, the choice in which data they used, even people that were there at the time saw as problematic, and so this gets into the thing of, do you think that there could be problems where people use science, and I'm using that term in a very broad sense, not, I think you and I would...
This isn't a convention, right? We don't need to be super technical, but I'm with you. It's a colloquial conversation.
But for others who are watching, because you and I have talked about this some, so we understand some of the terminology we use, but science, you and I would end up agreeing, is this, is going to be, observable, repeatable, there's methods to it. That's going to be different than the philosophical science. I think even you used that term before, is this idea of where we use science more in as a philosophy, where it's not.
Well, I call that scientism.
Yeah.
Scientism. But there is a philosophy of science which is different, which is the philosophy of why evidence supports hypotheses and like really detailed philosophical points like that. But if science is your philosophy, scientism, I think that's baloney. And keep in mind, I have a master's in education in science communication. I want scientific literacy more than anyone, and I think scientism is a joke.
Yeah, and that's the term that you use, and I may actually start using that more, because I talk about science as a philosophy, because that's how it's being used. So do you think there could be a dilemma when we start talking politics, of people using science incorrectly to force political decisions and force political agendas?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the most simple answer I can give is yes. Not only that, but within science there is politics, right? Which principal investigator gets published about topic X even though 12 papers have been submitted? That has a lot to do with who knows who, and who's glad handling somebody else, and who's on the boards of what, and this, that, and the other. There are politics within science. There are legitimate critiques of science. There are illegitimate critiques of science.
I forget the book. And as like you, I read from a pretty wide variety, but I read a lot of books from, that study a whole lot of things.
Sure.
But I remember reading a book on, it was from an atheistic point of view. I can't remember the title, but basically the author, what she had pointed out was that there was a shift that happened in the scientific community, and that's how she called it, the community.
Sure.
And she said it started with Einstein. She said Einstein was the first famous scientist. Before then, nobody was famous for doing science.
Mhm.
Nobody had name recognition. Einstein was a household name. And it wasn't Albert Einstein, it was just Einstein.
Yeah. Maybe Newton. Maybe Newton in the 17th century.
Yeah, but Newton didn't have the fame probably as much as we see,
Well, not fame as we recognize it now, like literally on TV, pictures, in the news,
And his name recognized everywhere where people, I mean, to say that you're an Einstein means that you're super bright. And people talked about, or she had talked about the fact that people were recognizing Einstein, not, and really it was his
idolatry.
Yeah, it was an idolatry. It was because they knew him as being this brilliant guy, but he could explain his science research to children almost.
Yes.
And that was what really people latched onto, and he became known around the world to the point few people even know this, but when Israel became a nation, they were looking for a prime minister. He was the most well-known, well-recognized Jewish person. He was actually asked to be prime minister, and he considered it for a little while and then was like, "Are you nuts? I do science. I don't run countries."
Mm-hmm.
But it was probably the smartest decision for him. But the thing was this author said that entered a new era, and she went through a litany of other scientists that after Einstein became it became a new way where scientists were writing to have that bestseller. And this wasn't a Christian writing. This is someone that was a professing atheist just critiquing within what she saw in her own circles. And the interesting thing I saw with that was that she was recognizing, she was mentioning differences between someone like Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking. And the difference in they're both celebrities, but for different reasons. One for his scientific achievement, and she was arguing that Dawkins for his communication ability more than his scientific achievement. And so just wanted you to interact with that for a little bit, and then Tom has a question for you.
Sure. So yeah, I'd buy that for $1, right? So looking at history, Einstein was post World War II, right? Or mid to pre-peri and post World War II.
He was right. I mean, he was actually in Germany.
He left Germany because of the National Socialist movement.
Yeah, I mean, he even left because he was in. Now I'm drawing a blank. I want to say Switzerland, but that's not right.
He was all over the place. I have an audiobook on him by Walter Isaacson, which is
yes, I read the same one. Oh,
okay, yeah. So he went to school all over the place. But anyway, so the timing of that.
By the way, this shows the difference between you and I. See, I'm being Jewish. I'm smarter. I got it for free from the library. You bought it. See?
Hey, this next statement is brought to you by Audible.com. I think Audible.com is one of the best investments a person can make, even at the lower level. Anywho, $14.95 a month.
Library free. Do you know that my library has now, I think it's up to 150 of the great courses, if you're not familiar.
You and I were talking about this, yeah. I buy them. I buy the audio version of them.
And I make my library buy them, and then I listen.
That's awesome.
I'm cheap, I admit it.
Oh, man. So anyway, to answer your question, Andrew, stop trying to...
Why are you dodging my question?
Gosh. Yeah, so post-World War II was the beginning of, the American Dream era, and it was also the beginning of the beginnings of Cold War, right? And so the space race, the Cold War, the American Dream, better living through chemistry. Science was really revered. When we got deeper into the Cold War, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics were really promoted because we wanted to be in space first, not necessarily because there were things in space that the scientists at the time were interested in, but because we wanted to do it before Russia. And of course, there are interesting things in science for us to do, but making something that orbits the Earth doesn't collect much data, other than being able to do it and show off and prove yourself as more powerful than Russia. The reason why I bring that up is in the, whatever you want to call it, the comet's tail of, or the coattails of Einstein being popular, all of a sudden being a scientist and popular was a cool thing. You got your Richard Feynmans going on, right? And you got, everyone in their time doing great things, being able to communicate science. And Richard Dawkins is a really good science communicator. His philosophy on atheism, Mets and Mets. But he's a good biologist, and he's a great explainer of, he's a good science communicator. Stephen Hawkins, he's Hawking. It's Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking. Okay, Stephen Hawking is also a very good communicator, but that's theoretical physics mostly. And but he certainly is. He's a great mind. And yeah, so A Brief History of Time, bestseller. The impetus for writing bestsellers to the general public as scientists was kind of forged by the Einsteinian Cultural Revolution, which I think is what you're addressing, right? So, yeah, like I said, I would buy exactly what you said for $1. The problem is the popularity of science books has now gotten to the point where one person who has the 3 letters PhD after their name, or the letters, DR in front of their name, can put out a book that'll be a bestseller, and it doesn't have to have great science in it because books aren't peer-reviewed like scientific articles are. And even within those books that aren't peer-reviewed, you could use peer-reviewed literature, cherry-pick quotes from it, misinterpret it, and put it in part of your reference section to tell a narrative that doesn't really jibe with what the authors that you're referencing agree with.
An interesting, you're saying that was bringing to my mind is Da Vinci Code.
That was a fun book. That was a fun book to read.
Very well written. I mean, he writes brilliantly. I
disagree. I think Dan Brown's a horrible writer, but I think that his stories are great.
Yeah, the story. Yeah, I mean, his stories are captivating. I've read, I think, most of his books. But,
you and me both. Yeah.
But the thing is that what he did with Da Vinci Code, which was a little different than his other books, was he footnoted it all, and it gave it a sense of an academic work. But then when he was challenged on the academics of it, he'd go, "It's just a novel. It's just a novel." And,
I know. He was playing both sides of that coin, definitely.
Yeah, he's able to play both sides. Another example was, who is that guy? The really heavy-set guy that was into the politics. He went after 9/11, saying that Bush did
Michael Moore.
Michael Moore. And it was funny because he did it. It was the first time he did it. It was a docudrama, if you remember that term. And it allowed him to make it look like a documentary. But at any point that he got challenged on the facts of it, hey, it's a drama. And he was allowed to do both. And I think when you're saying with the writing, it seems that there's some of that in where, yeah, you can make it sound like it's really scientific and technical and footnoted and sourced, but then if you get challenged, we could back off and just say, hey, it's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, certain books are more like that than others. Of course, the Dan Browns of the world. I mean, if Stephen Hawking got challenged on his ideas in his book, I think that he would have a very easy time backing that up, right? Because most of what he's writing about are his ideas. But I think that we can both agree that for every Stephen Hawking, there are 10 to 20 other non-Stephen Hawkings writing drivel that is lapped up by the science appreciating community that lap it up because their scientific literacy is not quite as where it should be. And I think this kind of dips into so I saw somebody asking about naturalism. Tom.
Yeah, well, I was going to first let Tom come in, and then I did want to have that person talk on naturalism if he wanted to talk. He hasn't. I asked him if he wanted to join in, and I have yet to hear. So, but Tom, if you want to unmute yourself and then go with your question.
Hey guys.
Hey Tom.
Yeah, so I have a question. In my background has been through a number of years dealing with, as a Christian, dealing with a lot of non-believers in different areas, but a lot of atheists. But the thing is, though, from an atheist perspective, since I've been very heavy on the creation science side of things, I've dealt with most folks on the evolution front, right?
Okay.
And so most atheists, and I've got even family members that are, I guess, more agnostic and oneness atheists, but the position that they always hold to seems to be like 90+% of the time is appeal to naturalist world, naturalism, evolution, science, and then they always use that as a basis to then move upon and then say that, defend their position and attack the Christian or my position.
Okay.
And it seems like it's been a very heavy, it's always been that way. And so you made a couple comments, I think, along the lines of...
Well, I definitely made a couple comments.
on philosophy, and I get that. I get the old subjective versus objective appeal, but of philosophy and however in presuppositionalism and how to in assumptions, but that actually is the very basis of evolution and naturalism anyway. So I'm curious though, since most of what I've dealt with has been the support for evolution, the support for natural science, the assumption of, I call it it's actually the ad populum argument, a logical fallacy of always leaning on the scientists of the day or the era, whatever.
Although that's not ad populum. Ad populum would be the population in general.
Well, if you make the argument, right, from an ad populum, say, well, the majority of the scientists believe in some type of part of evolutionary theory, then it is correct, and that's where you get into the logical fallacy.
Okay, so I just want to address that very quickly, but then I think that there's a deeper question that you have that I definitely want to address. Appealing to authority, appealing to a consensus of experts doesn't necessarily mean that what they agree on is true and correct. But science isn't looking for truth with a capital T. It is looking for knowledge that is provisional and a best fit to existing evidence. And even though a consensus of experts could be wrong, as a rule of thumb, it is a much better place to start than a consensus of the general population or the opinion of one person within that consensus of experts. So that's that. That's what I have to say about that.
But consensus would not be science. Right. I mean, when people appeal to scientists as proof that the science is right.
Well, once again, you're using language that scientists don't use. Scientists don't prove. Scientists aren't right.
No. I'm saying
there are theories that are
make the appeal. That's why I'm saying it. When people make an appeal to, well, all the scientists believe. Like, for example, if I say all the scientists believe that the Earth is millions of years old, therefore it is.
Or even a majority, even when there's a claim for the majority. And that's where I get into that popular argument.
Well, sure. So the only thing that I would say against that is, it is, as a rule of thumb, it is a better place to start from an epistemological position than the opinion of the scientifically illiterate or the general population or non-experts, although it could be wrong. The most honest way to address it is that science doesn't prove anything. Evolution could be shown to be false, and all of the ideas, all the current scientific theories that exist could be shown to be false. Currently, there are theories that are a better fit to the existing evidence than others, and there are criteria for that. Scope, accuracy, flexibility, Oh, there's a handful of them. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. But there's 5 of them, and those are 3 of them. But there are criteria for what determines what theories are a better fit of existing evidence than others. So,
Okay.
but that's the little rabbit hole of appeal to authority. But you were talking about naturalism.
Right. And let's define that a little better here, clear on my part, because I understand what you're saying. You're talking about, I believe, the accuracy and the starting point to what we would appeal to for what would be the better starting point. What is the better? What makes sense to actually use as a foundation for a good argument, experience, knowledge.
So you're talking about the scientific method now.
Right, but this is where I want to differentiate, because now what I'd like to do is differentiate between these observable things that we do in a laboratory, and I think where the unobservable things, the untestable, the best way that I've seen it put in the past is it usually the dribble comes down to at the end of the day of the argument of micro versus macro evolution, and how macro starts really into a philosophy, whereas micro is the observable stuff. And so you have this debate where all the evidences are put up on a plate, and then when you actually look at it, you're like, you know what, the creationists and the evolutionists will actually agree on the micro evolution aspects. So the things that we can see and observe, the genes, the biology, the chemistry, the biochemistry, astronomy, all the things that we see through a telescope and a petri dish, that we use that scientific method and apply that to, we all agree on that. We can deal with it, we can see it, both Christians and non-Christians on both sides of the fence. But where it really comes down, that nail comes down with a hammer, that's actually where you say, okay, but wait a minute, if you're going to extrapolate the experience of microevolution in that laboratory back in history, which is really the discussion, it's the discussion on the accuracy of Scripture, the justification of Jesus Christ, being truth, everything written in the Old Testament, the science of the Old Testament being the foundation of the New Testament, everything usually kind of comes and boils to that in the debate of the science, right? And so when you start talking about macroevolution,
if you're asking me if that's right, I disagree with you, but I want you to finish your point.
So, that's kind of where I want you to go with that. This is where I spend a lot of time, is conversation of how and why micro and macro are different, and why it becomes a philosophy, and what are the problems with so-called science when it does become extrapolated into macroevolution, and then they claim, well, it's just true, apes to man theory, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so a couple things. Evolution is not the sum of all science. So talking about or critiquing the biological theory of evolution does nothing to take away the validity of how science works as a method for epistemology within naturalistic methodologies or methodological naturalism, within the confines that is the protocol of what currently we understand as the scientific method. So that being said, let's specifically talk about the biological theory of evolution. The biological theory of evolution, one of the arguments against what you're saying that micro and macro are different is some would say within science that is fetishizing the observable component of what some consider the scientific method to be. Just because you can't observe it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is any less valid or a less better fit of the existing evidence than things that we can observe, because science doesn't only ask to predict things moving forward in time. A good theory can also retrodict things, and that is perfectly valid. I know that in certain apologetic circles, they call that historical science as compared to observable science. In reality, scientists call both of them science. So an argument against the distinction between micro and macro evolution goes something like this. You can't walk a mile unless you take a step first. Right? So the extraction that you're talking about that you believe is philosophical isn't just some random idea that people glommed onto. It would be a horrible best fit. It would be a horrible candidate for a best fit of evidence if it didn't have corroborating evidence that from other fields of science that converged on that theory being currently considered the best fit, with the idea in mind that there could be evidence that comes to fruition that shows it to be less accurate than the theory that we adhere to later on. That's the most concise answer I can give.
So maybe some examples might be good at this point. So, for instance, a good example to put this kind of in a practical case. Let's get down to an actual argument here.
Well, before we get into specific examples, I'm going to be deadly honest and say that I don't study biology. Are you a biologist?
No, I'm not. No, I'm actually a computer software engineer.
Okay, I study psychology. I do work in the laboratory, but it doesn't touch on biology. What's that, Andrew?
You smell things all day long. Admit it.
I do. I study the psychology of the sense of smell. That's the God's honest truth.
All right, let's do this to move on. I haven't heard from. I'm going to add Appeal into the broadcast if he wants to interact with you. He had a question for you on atheism versus naturalism, and if he wants to interact, that would be good. Now would be a good time. If not, I'm going to bring Seth in. He had some questions. So Appeal, if you're still there, since we don't, if you are, just unmute yourself.
Hello.
There we go.
Hello.
Go for it.
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay, so difference between naturalism and atheism. So naturalism is simply thinking that the observable physical world is all that is. Atheism is just saying you don't believe in a God, so I was just simply stating they're not mutually exclusive.
And I think that the question that you're talking about wasn't looking at them as being mutually exclusive. I think that it was equivocating. How could you be an atheist and rely on naturalism so bad and just not call yourself a naturalist? I think was a paraphrasing of the comment that I think you're addressing. And if somebody here can correct me, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, that's how I thought. I'm scrolling up right now to look for the exact. The exact thing was naturalism and atheism aren't mutually exclusive. Was the statement.
But that's a statement that Appeal made, I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, but what's the statement before that?
Oh, that's right, from Tom. Question is along the lines of how you would lean on atheism when most atheists lean very heavily on naturalism.
And I'm saying you can be both. I'm saying you can be a natural atheist.
Oh yeah, and I think that Tom's question has to do with like, how can they not be equivocated almost? And I'm paraphrasing. So Tom, if you're there and you can clarify this, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, that's basically where I was going with that. Was as an atheist, what basis would you stand on as an atheist if you did not appeal to naturalism as your basis in the evolutionary theory? I mean, I've never met an atheist ever that didn't stand on naturalism and evolution, to be honest.
I have met spiritual atheists that
yeah, you can believe in ghosts and all sorts of things.
But you could believe in a ghost, but you're still going to see the world as the conditions have always been as we observe them today, and they don't extrapolate that very far.
You'd have to ask that person who is a spiritual atheist. I believe that's Seth, who is in the hang right now.
Yeah, and I just brought him into. So Seth, if you can unmute yourself. I just brought you in.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm Seth. I'm a strong atheist. I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm a spiritualist. I believe in the spiritual realm. I'm just not a naturalist. I'm not convinced naturalism is true, and I'm an atheist.
Okay, could you please explain that? Because I would love to hear like how you're not a naturalist, but you're an atheist.
I'm not convinced naturalism is true, but I'm convinced atheism is true, based on a few philosophical arguments that seem to show that atheism is true, and lacking good arguments for God.
So do you have another idea that's not a naturalist or not naturalism that you lean towards, that you've thought through?
No, just like if someone's not convinced of determinism, it doesn't necessarily mean that they think that determinism is false or they have some alternative. They're just not convinced of one, and they can be convinced of other philosophical ideas that don't contradict with other ideals. And I don't think I'm being inconsistent by not accepting naturalism and accepting atheism.
Seth, would it be fair to say that you're reserving judgment on naturalism?
Yeah.
You're not denying it, You're just not taking it on board yet.
Right. And it's actually really useful as an atheist to not grant naturalism in some cases. A lot of answers to the cosmological argument are something other than God that's outside of nature created the universe.
And we would call that thing God. Oh.
Nope.
Okay, so what you say there's good arguments for atheism. What do you say is your best argument for atheism, Seth?
I don't know what the best one is. My favorite right now is the argument from divine hiddenness.
I didn't hear that, sorry.
I don't know about the best, but my favorite right now, the best one going, I don't know the best one going, my favorite one going right now is the argument from divine hiddenness.
Divine hiddenness? Okay, so this is the first time I'm hearing it, so can you explain that?
I can try. So basically the argument from divine hiddenness basically assumes, there's a couple of, I don't know if I can put it syllogistically, but it assumes that God is hidden, it's not obvious to all living people, and that if theism were true, then there would be no people that wanted a relationship with God that didn't have a relationship with God. And there seems to be people that would like a relationship with God that are denied this relationship with God. The best explanation for this is that atheism is true.
Okay, and I'm not sure I'm following it. So, so the idea is that atheism is true because if there was a God, people who want to have a relationship with him would have a relationship. Is that?
Yeah, Wolf just posted in the side chat a formal version of the argument.
Okay, so Wolf posted this, and I'll quote. Let me actually, I got one better. I will add Wolf. Wolf, if you want to unmute yourself and you read what you posted, that would be better.
Yeah, that was sort of what I was gonna probably go into as well. Okay, basically, if there is a God, he is perfectly loving. If a perfectly loving God exists, reasonable non-belief does not occur. Reasonable non-belief occurs. No perfectly loving God exists, from 2 and 3. Hence, there is no God.
Okay, so let's interact with this because I see a dilemma in it in number 3, and that is you say reasonable non-belief occurs. First of all, well, actually, let's start with 2, right? If a perfectly loving God exists, reasonable non-belief does not occur. Why is that true? Why does that? Because you're making right. You're making your syllogism. I would say that number 2 is not valid.
Andrew, there's a problem with number 1.
Well, if there's a God, he is perfectly loving. It's going to the issue there is going to that we could get to is what's the definition of loving?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a problem with number 1.
Yeah.
You can't define what loving is, and how can you be perfectly loving without being perfectly just?
Well,
yeah,
well,
that's a definitional one, but I want to interact with number 2 because that's a logical one, and this is laid out as a logical synergism.
Yeah, basically, I think what the second premise comes from is the fact that this God is not just all loving but also all omnipotent. So basically, he doesn't want to see his creation burn in hell, yada yada. And he's perfectly capable of showing, some experience that would allow, like, the skeptic to be, to be revealed to the truth and, lead to skepticism and believe. But that doesn't occur, at least not on an empirical basis. So that would sort of lead you to the third, if not fourth premise.
But the thing that invalidates number 2 is that it avoids and ignores the fact that God is wrathful, he's just, he's righteous. And in being just and righteous, that's where his wrath comes in because he must punish those that break law. So he is loving, but his love is not, and this is, I think, where Tom was getting to with the definition of love. And there is this false definition, I think, of love today. I call it actually a cult of love because people have this idea that God's, if he's loving, he's going to spoil us.
No.
And well, I mean, the idea here is that if he's loving, okay, then reasonable non-belief does not occur. But
right. We could actually, I can define loving in the terms of the argument to solve that. Loving in this case is that God wants an open relationship with anyone who wants a relationship with him. Would you deny that?
Is that the definition of God's love that he reveals?
I'm not positive on this version, but I think Schellenberg would say so.
Okay.
And if you actually read into the construction of these arguments, you'll see that they use words and they have certain ideas for the words, what the word has to mean in the argument for the argument to follow. And in this argument, if we're going to be charitable with it, I think we have to say that loving in this situation is God will enter in a relationship with anyone who wants a relationship with Him.
Okay. So and I disagree with that definition, but I'm going to go with it for the purpose of the conversation here, because still the point is that number 2 ignores other attributes of God, like the fact that He's holy, and He can't be in the presence of accepting sinful behavior. And so, yes, He's loving, but the fact that He loves and people, and you're saying people want to have a relationship with Him, but the reality is that what He reveals is that people don't want a relationship with Him. They want the benefits of the relationship with Him. But as I've come across, the majority of people do not want to accept God on His terms. They want the benefits of being in a relationship with Him.
I think this argument, and it hasn't been spoken a lot in the literature, but I think this argument hinges at least slightly on, at least the way I see it, it hinges slightly on a Platonic idea of virtue of knowledge. Plato stated through Socrates that there's a virtue of knowledge, that if you knew something was right, you couldn't do otherwise than to do what's right. So if somebody wanted a relationship with God, God can reveal the reasons why sin is wrong and why one ought not sin. It's a spittle on the face of Jesus, or whatever. It harms other people. There's reasons. There are good reasons to not sin, and God revealed it to us. I wouldn't want to sin.
I understand. It ignores attributes of God. There's some echoing, so I'm just going to mute you all. You can unmute, set to unmute yourself later when you want to talk again. But the issue is that it ignores certain attributes of God, like His holiness, His justice, His wrath, His righteousness, and it picks up on just one attribute. So logically, looking at that statement the way it was, there immediately becomes an invalidating of the argument. And
I couldn't disagree more.
Say again?
I couldn't disagree more.
Okay, how?
Well, I think that we're talking about people who are non-resistant to the idea that God exists and to wanting to do what's best to bring about the best possible world, which I think is what God wants.
No, it's not. That's the whole point.
God doesn't want the best possible world?
No, God wants what's best for His glory.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, but not to just interject real quick. I mean, yeah, but he wouldn't. I mean, we understand from the stories in the Bible that He talks to people, and does reveal like signs that allow them to be more than assured of their faith and believing. I mean, it is. I mean, you would agree that it's possible that He could send a divine sign to let all of humanity know of His existence, right? While the divergent nature of various religions, if that's not possible.
Well, I think that in fact God is very specific that all human beings, everyone knows that God exists, but some suppress that truth, and He says that's in unrighteousness. So right there in what God says is that He's already revealed Himself to every person, but some people suppress that. And so I argue that the way most people that profess to be atheists know that they know God exists is the amount of time they spend trying to convince themselves that God doesn't exist. I mean, I don't go to the malls to prove Santa Claus doesn't exist to children, but there's plenty of atheist blogs that I read on a regular basis and books that I read, and so there's a lot trying to prove God doesn't exist, and I think that's just evidence of that suppression. So the problem is that the premise, if you're going to have a logical argument, it has to be logically valid, and that premise is not valid because it only wants to look at one attribute of God and ignore the others, and it inherently assumes something that is not true of God, which is that he has revealed himself to everybody, and this assumes that the proof that God doesn't exist is that there's some people who want to know him, and yet they can't. And that's not exactly what is true. What is true is that every person does... Huh?
I'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, go for it.
Right. So that's actually the best rebuttal to the argument. Not a defeater by any chance, because you have to kind of beg the question, and you have to assume that God exists and that everyone knows he exists in order for that to be a defeater for the argument, and that begs the question a bit. But that's not really a problem, because it's certainly possible that everyone knows that God exists and people are suppressing the knowledge of God in their own righteousness. Sure. The opposite is also the case. I mean, if we want to talk about people who are using a lot of time online to prove something, well, then that's an argument against Christianity. William Lane Craig is suppressing the truth and unrighteousness of atheism in all of his philosophical works and debating.
How so?
Well, exactly.
I think he's just using your argument.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm trying to understand how he used the argument and made a statement. I'm just trying to get him to explain it, because I'm not seeing how how William Lane Craig would be doing that.
Well, exactly. You use the argument there's atheists spending a lot of time online trying to disprove God, and that's evidence that they really believe, but they're suppressing the truth. Well, that argument could be turned right on its head against Christians or anybody.
Well, no, there'd be a difference there, because William Lane Craig is not trying to prove atheism doesn't exist. He's trying to prove Christianity is true. So he's defending what he does believe, where atheism is trying to prove what doesn't exist.
Well, that's not true.
There's a difference there. Now, maybe in William Lane Craig's it'd be different than most, because I'm not a big William Lane Craig fan. So.
Well, William Lane Craig and other Christians spend a lot of time specifically tackling atheism and the new atheist movement. And there's psychological reasons why this could be true. It certainly seems to be the case that if Christians and other believers are taken back and have a bit of an existential challenge when it comes to what atheists claim about the finality of death. So this is something that you'd want to suppress if it were true, that death is final and you don't get to go on to heaven after you die. So there's psychological reasons and reasons to believe online that if we're going to follow the reasoning that people that spend a lot of their time online trying to prove something or disprove something, they actually believe it. That's evidence for a lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't want to accept, including that William Lane Craig is actually a secret atheist.
Yeah, I just don't think that the argument's the same, so I'm not seeing that. There's a difference between defending what you believe and trying to disprove someone else's. I mean, I'm on a lot of atheist blogs. I don't see them trying to prove Islam is wrong.
And Rook, quick question. How is atheists and secular people generally tackling things that affect social policy? How is that the same as knowing a deity exists? Could you explain that to me?
I'm not. I'm going to ask you to say it again, but there's something with the way your microphone's coming in that I'm having a difficulty hearing it. So if you could say it again. Sorry.
How is atheists and secular people tackling social policy the same as saying they know God exists? I'm curious in that.
I don't think I made that correlation.
Well, you said that the reason that you go to the mall, you don't see people trying to say that Santa Claus doesn't exist. I mean, it's sort of alluding to that whole, like atheists get involved in like politics and certain things like that with regard to equal rights and things like that. You're like you equate that with saying like they know God exists. So I mean, how was
no,
that?
I was saying in relation to your syllogism that you had posted, the fact that you had said in there, I'm just scrolling up to it, is that if a perfectly loving God exists, reasonable unbelief does not occur. And I was responding to that. The issue of political stuff was a totally different context that we were talking. So the issue that I'm saying with this syllogism is it assumes that what God has revealed about himself is not true.
Right. I think that's the best rebuttal to the argument. The fact you just claim there are no non-resistant non-believers, and that's fine. The problem with that is it seems really extreme. I think that there's very few people that are going to accept that.
That's the point. It doesn't matter if they accept it. The point is, God has revealed it, and he's the only one that can. And
right,
so,
but it begs the question.
Huh?
It begs the question.
Well, you would need an all-knowing being to be able to reveal something of all people everywhere at all times.
Right, but that argument can be made even if God doesn't exist, and it begs the question that God exists. And the argument.
Well, the difference is that you're right, the argument could be made. The problem is you have nothing is the all-knowing thing, and therefore you have nothing knowing everything.
I actually know. My statement isn't that I know that there are non-resistant non-believers. The argument is there does often seem to be non-resistant non-believers. I mean, look at Mother Teresa's letters to Jesus that came out after she died. She expressed a lot of doubt in her end days and wrote letters to Jesus metaphorically, or seemingly metaphorically, expressing her doubt that Jesus was there listening to her.
Well, and so maybe I will shock some people here, but Mother Teresa, by all accounts, is in hell right now. And if that upsets people, I'm sorry, but she didn't accept God on his terms. This is the point. She didn't accept God on his terms. She wanted God on her terms. Mother Teresa was not a Christian.
Right. I'm not saying she's a Christian. My own argument is that there seems to be people that go through their life that seemingly really, I mean, say what you will about her. She seemed to be all in for the church.
Oh, she devoted her life to it, yeah, but I totally will accept that.
Right.
I mean, I know people that knew her, so that were in India, working with her, or working around her, and got to know her and be with her.
The basic point is that if you don't beg the question that God exists, God is revealed, that everyone secretly knows he exists, even if they don't secretly or outwardly like you, secretly like me, know that he exists, then when you look out in the world, there seems to be non-resistant non-believers. People like me, who would like nothing more than God to just flip a switch in my head and make me believe he exists. I'd be fine with that, if he actually exists.
Well, the thing, though, is that your argument has one slight flaw. If God doesn't exist, you wouldn't be able to account for anything, because you and I are having a reasoned conversation. But that requires God.
Why?
Because how could you explain the immaterial world without an immaterial source? Chemicals.
Could you define the immaterial world, please?
Not material.
Like an example of something immaterial.
Your ability to reason.
So my ability to have conscious thought, right?
Yeah. Your ability to be able to do things that animals can't do because they're not made in the image of God, but angels can do, men can do, being human beings can do. I don't want to seem sexist there for any women there listening. It's an ability to reason, the laws of logic, morality, truth, knowledge. These are not material things, but yet we have these abilities different than animals would. I mean, you do not see a single animal holding up a save the human signs, but yet we need saving. You don't see them setting up 401ks. You don't see them setting up, court systems.
Well, sure, because just hold on, just to comment on that. Well, I think the difference between those other species and us is that we have this sense of self-awareness, the ability to create abstractions.
And where did we get that from?
Right. Well, I just want to point something out real quick. It's just a fun little side note. It's not really pertains to the argument, but me and my friend Adam, who's a Christian theist, we always talk about this when we hang out. Have this fun little game we like to play. called "This Is What Apes Do." Right? When I was installing my graphics card, I said, there's a weird thing that apes do. Apes take silicon and they arrange it in a certain way to where when you apply the right amount of electricity into it, it makes complex animated caricatures on a screen that you control with a little plastic controller. That's something apes do.
Okay.
Well, no, it's in stark contrast to what you're saying. You don't see animals doing X, Y, and Z. Well, humans are animals.
That's where we differ. We differ because humans are made in the image of God. So Seth, I'm muting you not because I don't want you to speak. I'm just muting you because of the background. Sorry. And folks, if I do mute folks, it's only because of background. If I do mute you for some other reason, I'll tell you.
He's lying.
No, lying is making someone smell this great stew and telling them they can have some and not letting them have it.
Oh, Maron. Talk about holding on to a grudge with this one. Alan.
I want to get the meal. You just had way too much wine that day, friend.
You're telling me.
All right. So the thing, and actually what we'll do is, because we've got about 12 minutes left before we wrap up, so let me ask this. I have brought everyone in, even Rocco, to the because he's the only one that hasn't spoken here. Does anyone, before we get into discussing the syllogism, anyone else have any questions or comments regarding Atheist Dogma that they want to present to either Chris or I? If so, just unmute yourself and go for it.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to take the opportunity, I guess, right now to say that I appreciate Christopher. His, his general, personality. I guess just the way that he's approaching, I guess everything that's been presented so far, and because I've run into, unfortunately, some people, I guess, on both ends of the spectrum, Christian and non, who haven't been as cordial, and honest, I guess, and just willing to listen and be listened to and whatnot. So yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. That's really awesome of you to say. I actually have a question for Tom. Tom, you and I were talking about naturalism, yes?
Yo.
Yeah. So would you say, to try to bring it back to the topic of the overall hangout, would you say that naturalism is a dogmatic stance that the atheists that you've interacted with take on?
I would say so.
Like dogmatically naturalists?
I would say so, and I have particular examples, which we don't have a lot of time here, I understand, but like one of those would be like radiometric dating, when they would talk about extrapolating micro to macro evolution, and they would adhere to very fundamental naturalistic principles of radiometric dating. They would go to carbon 13 to 14, uranium, lead, strontium, potassium, argon. They go to very specific cases but those specific cases also presuppose three fundamental assumptions, and so these are outlined on Answers in Genesis and ICR, various websites out there. But it is the very basis of naturalism that they assume to be true before they actually start the conversation, and they don't even understand they're doing that quite often. But they just assume that truth and then build cases upon why macroevolution is true and is no different from microevolution, and they're interconnected and interwoven. And so I think that's where they miss a lot of that, that's one particular example. There are others where they don't connect the dots, where it's like, okay, they assume naturalism. They always assume the Earth, the conditions on the planet throughout history have always been the same. And that's not what Scripture teaches. So if we had the conditions of Scripture, we would have that flipping of philosophies, like devolution rather than evolution. Mm-hmm. And when you actually look at it scientifically, it actually looks better. The more that I learn about science, the more the devolutionary model seems true based on my presuppositions. But when I have conversations with atheists, majority of them do stand on naturalism, but when they try to present their scientific evidence, they always assume those things to be true to begin with, and they never actually talk about why.
Well, I think that's a really good point. That could probably be another whole hour conversation.
Or
As
several.
you know, as I mentioned in like the previous hangout, there are two different schools of thought. Was it the previous hangout or was it this one earlier? There are two different schools of thought about letting supernatural or non-natural explanations into the Olympic stadium of science, right? There are some people that are like, just don't let them in. They can't compete. And there are other people who say, let them in, but considering that the natural explanations are going to be a better fit, and the supernatural explanations that have been presented so far haven't been as good as the naturalistic explanations, they just won't be the medal winners. So, I mean, there is certainly methodological naturalism is considered a criteria to some. And just a rule of thumb by others. So yeah, it is an assumption. But that's what science is, right? The analogy that I use is, if you have a toolbox of understanding things, science is a hammer meant for a nail. You could have a screw and use a hammer to drive it in, but a screwdriver is better than that, better for that. So use a screwdriver instead. Also, science, instrumentally, as a hammer, could be used as a coffee table leg if your coffee table leg goes out. But that's not what it's meant for. That's kind of like stirring your soup with a rake. So, in an instrumental view, science's purpose is really only to give natural explanations to natural phenomena.
It is, but also when you account for where our tax dollars go and the supporting of these very institutions in public education and yada, 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 and the textbooks we use and the way we're training our kids, the entire concept, which could be true of Scripture, of a devolutionary model, is completely excluded from that base. And there is no appeal to that even being a possibility.
Well, you're right. You're right. Religion is not taught in science. And science is not taught in comparative religion classes.
I would say it is, and that's where I actually, there's a whole other topic here, but I define evolution as a religion.
Well, evolution is not science, right? Let me rephrase that. Evolution is not the sum of science. The biological theory of evolution is a scientific theory.
I like the way
it does not define science.
I like the way you said it the first time.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did.
Right, but evolution is itself has as a god itself time and random chance, and when you extrapolate that, you can really get anything.
But when you use idiosyncratic definitions for terms, you can say that anything is anything else. So if you're going to call those two things gods, then that's not an operational definition that I can move forward with.
The invisible pink unicorn is a god, like the space teapot's a god. I mean, you know what
I think Seth's beard is a god.
Right.
Oh, he's not there.
I think this.
Well, I think and if he's not there, he does a pretty nice beard. Just saying. I think he'd give Rocco a run for his
Seth's beard.
So let's do this. We're gonna go off air. And then what we end up doing for those who are listening on Mixlr, you or those who are watching on YouTube, you can go to Mixlr, search for Bible Thumping Wingnut, all one word, and you can listen. You can also join into the after show. We basically will go off air, so you can't watch it on YouTube, but we continue on with the discussion sometimes till 2, 3 in the morning, until no one else wants to talk. But so we're going to go off air. I do want to address one thing that someone is saying in the chat room, or sorry, in YouTube, about the comment I made about Mother Teresa. The statement is that I have no right to say Mother Teresa is not a Christian and is in hell. When did God give you that authority? It's not me saying that. It's God saying that, and He has the authority. God defines a Christian as someone who does not trust in works, but trusts only in the work of God. This is why there's only 2 religions in the world. There is a religion of human effort and a religion of divine effort, and Christianity is the only one that teaches a religion of divine effort, that God did the work. Mother Teresa did the work that she did in Calcutta because she was trying to earn her way to heaven. And her good works are what will condemn her to hell according to God, not me. It's not me saying that Mother Teresa is in hell by something innate to me. It is me saying that God says Mother Teresa is in hell because she was trusting in her works to save her. And her works are the very thing that will damn her. In fact, God says that the name of the books that he will judge people by is called the book of works. It is their works. And she is there, and I don't enjoy saying it. I don't want anyone to be there. I don't deserve to avoid it. The people in this hangout right now are probably all a far better person than me morally. But the reality is that it's not my morals that get me in a right standing with God. It's God who does that. And so I'm not, I want to be clear to say that the reason that I say Mother Teresa is in hell, probably, and I always have to say probably because she at least knew the Bible and maybe in the last moments of life gave up her works and repented and trusted in Christ alone. But the Roman Catholic Church does not teach what the Bible teaches. And I don't know if that's going to be a shock to some that are listening. You want to see the differences, you can get my book, What Do They Believe? And I go through those differences. You can go to the Striving for Eternity YouTube channel, look at the classes that we have on the world religions and see what Roman Catholicism teaches, and you're going to see it's a different gospel and it's got a different authority. And so I don't believe that someone that believed as much as Mother Teresa did in Roman Catholicism could be a Christian. Now, I'm not saying that all Roman Catholics can't, because I think that there's Roman Catholics who don't believe in Roman Catholicism, but they grew up Catholic, and being such, they can come to reading the Bible and knowing the truth. I knew a girl in college who just preferred the Roman Catholic Church because that's what she grew up in, but she understood the gospel. And I've always believed that she would eventually leave the Catholic Church, and she did. But I think it was after she was out of college and maybe after she was on her own. So that being said, I just wanted to answer that. Always encouraging folks who are listening, this is a product of Bible Thumping Wingnut. It's a weekly podcast that you can listen to. Go to BibleThumpingWingnut.com. You can get all of their podcasts. They do a podcast which is from a Google Hangout on Sunday nights with Matt Slick. This is another one of those with me, Andrew Rappaport from Striving for Eternity, and they have one that will be on Wednesday that is their own Tim and Len podcast, and then there's also on Fridays where they basically are taking the Striving for Eternity Academy and have turned that into a podcast. So I want to encourage you guys to go to Bible Thumping Wingnut, check out all of their podcasts, check out their website, their blogs that they have. They have a bunch of blogs that are going on. We encourage you to also go, if you're on Facebook, to the Bible Thumping Wingnut Facebook group, even those that profess to be atheists. It is truthfully a place where we try to have a free and open exchange. People don't get blocked very easily. It is hard to get blocked or booted from that group. It is hard to not have your opinion heard in that group. So if those of you who want to have some of the exchange as we're having here and you want to carry it over there, it's a great place to have that conversation, to be able to interact. Just as Chris said, you know, we're some apologists like to test their views. It's a great place for some of you atheists that you want to test your views. Come on there. Do want to also lastly thank my friend, I want to hope that I can call him friend, Chris Mouty. It's always great to have him on, always great to interact with him. I hope that what some of you see and some of you who watch Driving for Turn, you know that I like to have these kind of discussions. Well, I don't call them debates because we go back and forth, but there's no name calling, other than in jest. You know, I bust on Chris a lot, especially when we were both trying to lose weight. I think we've both given up on it, but I think my only motivation in losing weight was to lose more weight faster than Chris, and when he dropped out of the group, I lost my motivation. and so I'm getting
And it
fatter.
was steak dinners for the rest of the week.
Yes. I'm good with that. And so I do want to thank you, Chris. It's always great to interact with you, to discuss with you. I think that the humor you use, just to lighten conversations, to have a good, cordial, winsome conversation is always appreciated. And I appreciate that in you, that we always can do that. We disagree clearly, but we never fight about it. There's no need for the name calling. And I think both of us, and one of the things I do appreciate about Chris is that he'll call out people that have bad arguments on his side. It's not us versus them mentality. And so I hope you guys got to appreciate that with Chris. I don't know, do you still, Chris, have your podcasts and stuff anymore?
No.
No.
I've dropped out of the scene completely.
Can't plug that for you.
No, there is no plugging to be done.
Yeah.
Because they can't find anything.
So
maybe if you went to the New Covenant group, you could find some archived episodes of my show, Meeting of the Minds, but you won't be able to find them on my channel.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that clearly, if you watch the Matt Slick hangout, you're going to go to Chris to find out the right type of yeast to use for your beer, I guess, right?
Oh yes.
And if you didn't hear the Matt Slick hangout, then you have no idea what he's talking about. So, so with that, I'm going to take us off air. The conversation will continue. I thank each of you for participating. We'll continue the conversation. But want to just encourage you to go BibleThumpingWingnut.com.